I was standing in my kitchen making coffee when I heard the sickening crunch of metal against wood, followed by the unmistakable sound of splintering fence posts. It was 6:30 on a Tuesday morning in January, and I had not even finished my first cup yet. The temperature outside my house in Boulder, Colorado, had dropped to 18 degrees overnight, and frost covered every surface visible through my window. I rushed to the front door, grabbing my coat on the way out, and found a silver Lexus SUV embedded in what used to be the decorative wooden fence separating my property from the sidewalk. The vehicle had clearly lost control on the slight incline leading up to my corner lot, sliding straight through 30 feet of carefully maintained cedar fencing that I had installed just 2 years prior at a cost of nearly $4,000. Behind the wheel sat Patricia Holbrook, the vice president of our Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association, and possibly the most insufferable woman I had ever encountered in my 38 years of life. She was already out of her vehicle by the time I made it down my front steps, her perfectly styled blonde hair barely disturbed despite the obvious violence of the crash. She wore a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments. "Marcus," she said, not even acknowledging the destruction around her. "Marcus Emerson, your property is a hazard." I stopped in my tracks, genuinely confused. "Excuse me." "There is black ice all over this section of sidewalk," Patricia continued, gesturing vaguely at the ground. "You did not put down any salt or warning signs. I could have been seriously injured." I looked at the wreckage of my fence, then back at her completely undamaged person, then at her Lexus, which had sustained some front-end damage but was clearly drivable. "Patricia, you just destroyed my fence." "Because of your negligence," she shot back immediately. Her voice had that particular quality that I had come to recognize over the past 3 years of living in this neighborhood. A sort of weaponized entitlement that assumed everyone would simply bend to her will through sheer force of condescension. The HOA guidelines clearly state that homeowners are responsible for maintaining safe conditions on the sidewalks adjacent to their properties. "The city maintains the sidewalks," I replied, trying to keep my voice level. "And it is January in Colorado. There is ice everywhere." Patricia pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of the ground, the fence, and my property. "We will see what my attorney has to say about that. I am documenting everything. My neck is already starting to hurt." I had dealt with Patricia Holbrook exactly 4 times since moving into this neighborhood, and each interaction had been progressively worse than the last. The first time, she had cited me for having my trash cans visible from the street on a non-collection day, despite the fact that it was collection day and the truck simply had not arrived yet. The second time, she had objected to the color I painted my front door, claiming that the dark blue I had chosen was not on the approved color palette, even though I had checked the guidelines specifically, and it was literally the third option listed. The third time, she had attempted to fine me because my lawn was half an inch taller than the maximum allowed height, measured with a ruler she produced from her enormous designer handbag. The fourth time, just 2 months ago, she had threatened to take me to the HOA tribunal because I had hung Christmas lights 2 days before the approved decoration period began. Now she was standing in the ruins of my fence, taking pictures like she was a crime scene investigator, and threatening to sue me because she could not drive properly on winter roads. "Patricia, I need your insurance information," I said, pulling out my own phone to document the damage. "You are not getting anything from me until I speak to my lawyer," she replied. "In fact, I would advise you not to touch anything. This is evidence." "Evidence of what?" "Evidence that you crashed into my fence." Evidence of your negligence creating dangerous conditions that resulted in property damage and personal injury. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that losing my temper would only make this situation worse. You are claiming injury now. Patricia put one hand to her neck in a gesture so theatrical it would have been rejected from a community theater production. Whiplash is a serious condition, Marcus. It can take hours or even days for symptoms to manifest fully. A few of my neighbors had started to emerge from their houses, drawn by the noise and commotion. I saw Jerry Patterson from 2 doors down, still in his bathrobe, and Monica Chen from across the street, holding a steaming mug of what I assumed was tea. They both looked confused, which made sense because the scene before them was genuinely bizarre. "Folks," Patricia announced loudly, addressing the growing audience, "please be aware that the sidewalks on this section of Maple Ridge Drive are extremely dangerous. Marcus Emerson has failed to maintain safe conditions, and as you can see, it resulted in an accident. I will be bringing this to the full HOA board meeting next week." "Are you okay, Patricia?" Monica called out. "I have been better," Patricia replied, still cradling her neck. "But I am more concerned about the safety of our community. If this could happen to me, it could happen to anyone." I wanted to point out that nobody else had crashed into anything, that perhaps the issue was her driving rather than some imaginary failure on my part. But I knew it would be pointless. Instead, I called the police to file an accident report, despite Patricia's protests that it was unnecessary. Officer David Morrison arrived 20 minutes later, by which time Patricia had called her husband Glenn, and he had arrived in his own vehicle. Glenn Holbrook was a real estate attorney who specialized in commercial properties, and he had the same air of smug superiority as his wife. He immediately started speaking to the officer before I could even give my statement. "Officer, my wife has been injured due to dangerous conditions on this property," Glenn began. "We will be pursuing legal action, but we wanted an official report filed for documentation purposes." Officer Morrison, a patient-looking man in his mid-40s who had probably dealt with more than his share of HOA disputes in Boulder's nicer neighborhoods, simply nodded and began taking statements from both of us. He examined the scene, took measurements, and photographed everything from multiple angles. "Mr. Emerson, is this your fence?" he asked. "Yes, sir. I installed it 2 years ago with all proper permits." "And Mrs. Holbrook, can you describe what happened?" Patricia launched into a detailed account that made it sound like she had been navigating an Arctic expedition, rather than driving 3 blocks from her house to go to her morning yoga class. According to her version of events, the entire section of sidewalk in front of my house was a sheet of pure ice. There were no warning signs or salt deposits visible, and she had been driving at a completely safe and reasonable speed when her vehicle suddenly, and without any input from her, lost all traction and slid uncontrollably into my fence. "What speed were you traveling?" Officer Morrison asked. "No more than 15 miles per hour, Patricia said confidently. "I am always very careful in winter conditions." The officer made notes, then walked the length of the sidewalk in front of my property. I followed him, as did Glenn, though Patricia remained by her vehicle still holding her neck. "Mr. Emerson, do you salt this sidewalk?" Officer Morrison asked. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but it is not required. The city does not mandate it for residential properties, and the HOA guidelines say it is optional, not mandatory." "The HOA guidelines state that homeowners should take reasonable precautions to ensure safety," Glenn interjected, "which my client interprets as requiring salt or sand on icy conditions." "Your client," I repeated. "She is your wife." "I am also her attorney in this matter," Glenn replied smoothly. Officer Morrison completed his report, giving copies to both parties. He noted that there was indeed some ice present on the sidewalk, but also that ice was present on virtually every sidewalk in the neighborhood due to the overnight temperature drop. He documented the damage to both the fence and Patricia's vehicle, and recorded her complaint of neck pain, though he also noted that she declined medical attention at the scene. After the officer left, I called my insurance company and explained the situation. The claims representative I spoke with, a friendly woman named Sarah, listened to the whole story and sighed in a way that suggested she had heard versions of this tale many times before. "So she crashed into your fence, and now she is claiming you are liable," Sarah summarized. "Exactly." "Do you have any video of the incident?" I mentally kicked myself. I had been meaning to install a doorbell camera for months but had kept putting it off. "No, unfortunately." "That is okay. We will handle this." "File the claim. Send us the police report and any photos you took, and we will start the process. In the meantime, do not communicate with her or her husband except through insurance or attorneys." I spent the rest of that day getting estimates for fence repair and dealing with the aftermath of Patricia's vehicular assault on my property. The lowest estimate I received was $3,800, and that was from a contractor who could not start work for 3 weeks due to weather and his existing job schedule. That evening, I received an email from the Meadowbrook Heights HOA. It was from Sandra Young, the HOA president, and thankfully one of the more reasonable board members. The email informed me that Patricia Holbrook had filed a formal complaint against me for failure to maintain safe conditions and creating hazardous environment endangering community members. There would be a hearing at the next board meeting, scheduled for the following Wednesday at 7 in the evening at the community center. I had never attended an HOA board meeting before, having successfully avoided involvement in neighborhood politics for my entire tenure as a homeowner here. I had always paid my dues on time, followed the rules as best I could, and generally tried to fly under the radar. Now I was being summoned to defend myself against charges that seemed absolutely insane. The following morning, I received a certified letter. It was from the law offices of Glenn Holbrook and Associates. The letter formally notified me that Patricia Holbrook was pursuing legal action against me for negligence resulting in property damage, personal injury, and emotional distress. The letter demanded that I immediately admit fault, have my insurance company pay for all damages to her vehicle, and compensate her for medical expenses, lost wages, and pain and suffering to the tune of $50,000. $50,000. For an accident that she caused by driving into my fence, I called Sarah at my insurance company back. She had already received a similar letter and assured me that this was a common intimidation tactic. "They are hoping you will panic and settle quickly," she explained. "Do not worry. We have lawyers for this exact situation. Just forward us everything you receive and do not respond to them directly." The week leading up to the HOA meeting was surreal. Patricia apparently decided that her best strategy was to campaign throughout the neighborhood, telling anyone who would listen about the dangerous conditions at my property and how I had nearly killed her with my negligence. I heard through Jerry Patterson that she had gone door to door on the north side of the neighborhood with photos of her wrecked Lexus, describing a harrowing tale of survival. Monica Chen stopped by my house 3 days before the meeting with a casserole and some moral support. "I just want you to know that most of us think this is ridiculous," she said, handing me the dish. "Patricia has always been a bit much, but this is next level even for her." "I appreciate that," I said sincerely. "I honestly do not know what to do here. She crashed into my fence and somehow I am the bad guy. She has wanted to be HOA president for years, Monica confided, but Sandra keeps winning the elections. I think Patricia is trying to make herself look like some kind of safety crusader to boost her image for the next vote. That added a whole new dimension to this situation that I had not considered. This was not just about the accident or even about trying to shake me down for money. This was political maneuvering within the bizarre power structure of Suburban Homeowners Association governance. Wednesday evening arrived with another cold snap. The temperature had dropped to 22 degrees, and fresh snow had fallen the night before. I dressed in business casual attire, gathered all my documentation including the police report, photos of the damage, copies of the HOA guidelines, and the city code regarding sidewalk maintenance, and drove to the Meadowbrook Heights Community Center. The meeting room was more crowded than I expected. Apparently, Patricia had drummed up quite an audience for this spectacle. I recognized about 20 of my neighbors, plus the 5 board members seated at a long table at the front of the room. Sandra Young sat in the center, flanked by Patricia Holbrook on one side and 3 other board members I knew only vaguely on the other side. Sandra called the meeting to order at 7 sharp, working through routine business first. There were discussions about holiday decoration guidelines for next year, a proposal to repaint the community center, and a debate about whether to increase the annual HOA dues by $15 to cover rising maintenance costs. Then Sandra looked at her agenda and said the words I had been dreading. Next item, formal complaint filed by Patricia Holbrook against Marcus Emerson regarding unsafe property conditions. Patricia, would you like to present your case? Patricia stood, and I realized she had prepared a full presentation. She had a tablet connected to a projector, and suddenly the wall behind the board was filled with a photo of her damaged Lexus. "Thank you, Sandra," Patricia began, her voice taking on a somber tone. "What I am about to share with you is disturbing, but it is necessary for the safety of our entire community. On January 14th, at approximately 6:25 in the morning, I was driving to my yoga class when I was involved in a serious accident." She clicked to the next slide, showing the destroyed section of my fence. As you can see, the impact was severe, but this was not just an accident. This was the direct result of negligent property maintenance by one of our homeowners. Another click. This slide showed the sidewalk in front of my house, with several areas that did appear icy in the photograph, though it was impossible to tell from the image whether it was any worse than any other sidewalk in the neighborhood. Marcus Emerson failed to salt or sand this section of sidewalk, despite knowing that freezing temperatures were forecast. He provided no warning signs. He took no precautions whatsoever. And as a result, I lost control of my vehicle and sustained both property damage and personal injury. She touched her neck again in that same theatrical gesture. "I have been seeing a chiropractor 3 times a week since the accident. The pain is constant. I have difficulty sleeping. I have had to miss work." This was news to me, as Patricia's work consisted of managing some rental properties that she and Glenn owned. It was not like she punched a time clock anywhere. "But more importantly," Patricia continued, building to what she clearly considered her closing argument, "this represents a pattern of disregard for our community standards. Mr. Emerson has been cited multiple times for various violations. He has consistently shown that he believes the rules do not apply to him, and now his negligence has resulted in a dangerous situation that could have been fatal." She let that word hang in the air, fatal. As if a low-speed slide into a wooden fence at 6:30 in the morning was the equivalent of a highway pile-up. I am asking this board to impose the maximum fine allowable under our HOA guidelines, to require Mr. Emerson to implement a winter sidewalk maintenance plan subject to board approval, and to place a lien on his property until all damages to my vehicle and compensation for my injuries are paid in full. She sat down to what I would generously describe as polite, scattered applause from a few people in the audience who were probably her friends. Sandra looked at me. "Mr. Emerson, would you like to respond?" I stood up, suddenly very aware that I had not prepared a slideshow or any kind of presentation. I had my documents in a folder and the truth on my side, and I had assumed that would be enough. "Thank you. First, I want to address what actually happened. Mrs. Holbrook lost control of her vehicle and crashed into my fence. That is documented in the police report." I held up the report. Officer Morrison's investigation found that while there was some ice present, it was consistent with conditions throughout the neighborhood. There was no finding of negligence on my part. I looked around the room. Second, the city of Boulder does not require residential property owners to salt or sand their sidewalks. It is optional. The HOA guidelines also list it as optional, not mandatory. I have those guidelines right here, and I can read the exact language if needed. Patricia made a scoffing sound, but Sandra held up a hand to silence her. Third, I continued, I want to point out the basic logic problem here. Mrs. Holbrook is claiming that I am responsible for her crashing into my property. But nobody else crashed that morning. Nobody else has crashed since then. The supposed dangerous condition she is describing somehow only affected her, driving her own vehicle on that particular morning. A few people in the audience nodded. I was getting through to at least some of them. Finally, I want to address her claim about a pattern of violations. Yes, she has cited me 4 times in 3 years. The trash can citation happened because the garbage truck was late. The door color citation was for a color that is explicitly on the approved list. The lawn height citation was for being half an inch over the maximum, measured on a day when I was planning to mow that very evening. And the Christmas light citation was for decorating 2 days early, because that was the only day my brother was available to help me hang them. I looked directly at Patricia. This is not about safety or community standards. This is about her looking for someone to blame because she crashed her own car. The room was completely silent. I sat down, my heart pounding. Sandra cleared her throat. "Thank you both. The board will now deliberate. We ask that everyone except board members please step outside while we discuss." The audience filed out into the lobby of the community center. I stood awkwardly by the water fountain, avoiding eye contact with most people. A few neighbors came up to offer quiet words of support. Jerry Patterson told me he thought I had presented my case well. Monica Chen said Patricia was being ridiculous. Patricia herself stood on the opposite side of the lobby, surrounded by her own group of supporters, speaking in low, urgent tones. We waited for 45 minutes. The board finally called us back in, and we all returned to our seats. Sandra looked tired. The board has reached a decision regarding the complaint filed by Patricia Holbrook. After reviewing all available evidence, including the police report, photographs, HOA guidelines, and city code, we find that Marcus Emerson was not in violation of any HOA rules or regulations. The maintenance of ice and snow on public sidewalks is optional, not mandatory, and there is no evidence that the conditions on the sidewalk adjacent to Mr. Emerson's property were significantly different from conditions elsewhere in the neighborhood. I felt relief wash over me, but Sandra was not done. "However," she continued, "we do encourage all homeowners to take reasonable precautions during winter weather to promote safety throughout our community. Mr. Emerson, while you are not in violation, we hope you will consider salting your sidewalk in the future. Furthermore, and here Sandra looked directly at Patricia, the board finds that the request to place a lien on Mr. Emerson's property is inappropriate and beyond the scope of HOA authority. That is a matter for the courts if Mrs. Holbrook chooses to pursue legal action. Patricia's face had gone red. "This is unacceptable," she said, standing up. "Sandra, the board is supposed to protect homeowners. I was injured because of his negligence, and you are just going to let him get away with it." "The board has made its decision," Sandra replied firmly. "If you wish to appeal, you can present your case at next month's meeting, but you will need to bring new evidence that was not available tonight." "I will be bringing this to the membership," Patricia threatened. "We will see what the community thinks about a board that does not take safety seriously." She gathered her things and stormed out, followed by Glenn and her small group of supporters. After the meeting, Sandra pulled me aside. "I am sorry you had to go through this," she said quietly. "Patricia has been getting more aggressive with her complaints over the past year. This was the most extreme yet, but I do not think it will be the last we hear about it." "You think she will actually try to sue me?" I asked. Sandra sighed. "Honestly, yes." "Glenn already sent the demand letter, right? They are probably hoping you will settle just to make it go away. My advice is to let your insurance handle it and do not engage with them directly." I drove home feeling like I had won a battle but was still facing a war. The HOA had ruled in my favor, which was good, but Patricia seemed determined to make my life miserable one way or another. 2 weeks went by. I had gotten my fence repaired, submitting the bill to my insurance company, who assured me they would go after Patricia's insurance for reimbursement. I had heard nothing more from Glenn's law office, and I had started to hope that maybe the whole thing was blowing over. Then, I received a summons to appear in Boulder County Court. Patricia Holbrook was suing me for negligence, seeking damages of $75,000. The amount had apparently increased since the initial demand letter. I called my insurance company, who assigned me an attorney named Robert Callahan. Robert was in his early 50s, with silver hair and the calm demeanor of someone who had defended hundreds of cases just like mine. We met at his office in downtown Boulder 3 days after I received the summons. "This is a nuisance lawsuit," Robert said after reviewing all my documentation. "She has no case. No reasonable person would find you liable for her crashing into your fence." "Then why is she doing this?" I asked. "A few possible reasons. 1, she genuinely believes she is right. Some people are so convinced of their own victimhood that they cannot see basic logic. 2, she is hoping you will settle just to avoid the hassle. Or 3, she has some other motive we are not seeing yet." "Like what?" "Could be personal. Could be political within your HOA. Could be that her husband is bored and looking for something to do." Robert shrugged. "The why does not matter as much as the how. How we defend you, how we demonstrate she has no case, how we get this dismissed as quickly as possible." The lawsuit moved forward at the glacial pace typical of civil litigation. There was discovery, where both sides requested documents and information from each other. Patricia's attorneys requested 3 years of my property maintenance records. Any correspondence I had with the city or HOA regarding sidewalk maintenance, my financial records, and a detailed account of my whereabouts and activities on the morning of the accident. I provided everything I had. My property maintenance records consisted of lawn care receipts and the permit for my fence. I had no correspondence about sidewalk maintenance because I had never been told there was an issue. My financial records showed I was a project manager at a software company who paid his bills on time and had nothing to hide. and my whereabouts on the morning in question were inside my house making coffee until I heard the crash. In return, we requested Patricia's driving record, any citations or accidents from the past 5 years, documentation of her medical treatment for her alleged injuries, and any prior complaints or issues she had with my property. Her driving record showed 2 speeding tickets in the past 3 years and 1 accident from 18 months ago, where she had rear-ended someone at a stoplight. Her medical records showed she had been to a chiropractor, but the notes were vague and did not demonstrate any objective injury. And the complaints about my property were all the ones I already knew about, each one as petty as I remembered. Months passed. Winter turned to spring, and spring to summer. The case was scheduled for trial in September, nearly 8 months after Patricia had crashed into my fence. In that time, life in Meadowbrook Heights became increasingly uncomfortable. Patricia made good on her threat to campaign throughout the neighborhood, trying to turn other homeowners against me. She started a petition to recall Sandra Young as HOA president, claiming that Sandra was soft on rule enforcement and did not take safety seriously. She succeeded in getting signatures from about 30% of the homeowners. Not enough to force a recall election, but enough to make Sandra's life difficult. Patricia also started filing complaints against other homeowners for increasingly minor violations. Jerry Patterson got cited for having a garden hose visible from the street. Monica Chen got cited for her mailbox being the wrong shade of black. A young couple 3 streets over got cited for parking their car on the street overnight when they had a guest staying with them. It became clear that Patricia was on a crusade, and I was just the most visible target. She was trying to establish herself as the guardian of neighborhood standards, the only person willing to stand up and enforce the rules that kept Meadowbrook Heights the prestigious community it was supposed to be. The HOA board meeting in June was particularly contentious. Patricia proposed new rules that would make sidewalk salting mandatory during winter months, with fines of $500 per day for non-compliance. She also proposed installing security cameras at every intersection in the neighborhood to monitor for violations, and increasing the HOA dues by $200 per year to pay for a full-time community standards enforcement officer. Sandra and the other board members voted down all 3 proposals, with only Patricia voting in favor. She responded by filing more complaints, including one against Sandra herself for having weeds in her flower bed that exceeded 3 inches in height. It was exhausting to watch, and I could not imagine how exhausting it was to live through as a board member or as one of Patricia's many targets. Finally, September arrived, and with it my trial date. Robert Callahan had been confident throughout the process, but I was nervous. I had never been involved in a lawsuit before, and the idea of standing in court while Patricia's attorney tried to paint me as some kind of negligent villain was deeply unsettling. The trial was held in Boulder County District Court before Judge Maria Fernandez. Patricia showed up in a neck brace, which was interesting since I had seen her walking around the neighborhood without it just 2 weeks earlier. Glenn sat beside her at the plaintiff's table, along with another attorney from his firm, a younger man named Dwight something. Robert sat with me at the defense table, radiating calm confidence. Judge Fernandez called the court to order and asked for opening statements. Glenn stood up first. "Your Honor, this is a simple case of negligence." The defendant, Marcus Emerson, failed to maintain safe conditions on the sidewalk adjacent to his property. As a direct result of this failure, my client lost control of her vehicle and suffered property damage, physical injury, and ongoing pain and suffering. We will demonstrate through witness testimony and expert analysis that Mr. Emerson had a duty to salt that sidewalk, that he breached that duty, and that his breach directly caused my client's injuries. We are seeking $75,000 in damages to compensate Mrs. Holbrook for her medical expenses, lost wages, property damage, and pain and suffering. Robert stood for our opening statement. Your Honor, this is not a case of negligence. This is a case of a driver who lost control of her own vehicle and is trying to blame someone else for her mistake. The evidence will show that there was no duty to salt the sidewalk in question, that weather conditions were consistent throughout the neighborhood, and that no other drivers had any problems that morning. Mrs. Holbrook's own driving record shows a pattern of accidents. The defendant did nothing wrong, and we will ask the court to dismiss this case in its entirety. Patricia's attorneys called their first witness, who was Patricia herself. She took the stand, still wearing the neck brace, and placed one hand on the Bible to be sworn in. Glenn handled the direct examination. Mrs. Holbrook, can you describe what happened on the morning of January 14th? Patricia launched into her story, which had become more dramatic with each retelling. According to her testimony, she had been driving at exactly 12 miles per hour because she always drove slowly in winter conditions. The sidewalk in front of my house was like a skating rink, completely covered in black ice with no salt or sand visible anywhere. She had pumped her brakes gently, exactly as one should in icy conditions, but nothing helped. Her vehicle slid helplessly, completely out of her control, and slammed into my fence with such force that she immediately felt pain radiating through her neck and back. "And what medical treatment have you received?" Glenn asked. "I have been seeing Dr. Raymond at Boulder Chiropractic 3 times a week since the accident," Patricia replied. "I have also been taking prescription pain medication. The pain is constant, Your Honor. I wake up with it every morning. I cannot turn my head fully to the left. I have had to curtail many of my normal activities." "And how has this affected your work?" "I manage several rental properties, which requires showing units, meeting with tenants, and performing regular inspections. I have been unable to do much of that work. I have had to hire an assistant to help me at considerable expense." Glenn nodded sympathetically. "And when you approached Mr. Emerson after the accident, what was his response?" "He was completely dismissive," Patricia said, her voice taking on an edge of indignation. "He showed no concern for my well-being. He seemed more worried about his fence than about whether I was injured. He was hostile and argumentative." I wanted to object that I had been neither hostile nor argumentative, but Robert had instructed me to stay quiet and let him handle things. Glenn then called Dr. Paul Raymond, Patricia's chiropractor. Dr. Raymond testified that Patricia had indeed been coming to see him 3 times a week, that she exhibited signs of whiplash, including reduced range of motion and tenderness in the cervical spine, and that her injuries were consistent with a motor vehicle accident. On cross-examination, Robert asked Dr. Raymond some pointed questions. "Dr. Raymond, in your medical opinion, is it possible that Mrs. Holbrook's injuries could have been caused by something other than this accident?" "Well, anything is possible, but the timing suggests. Is it true that whiplash symptoms can be subjective and difficult to verify objectively?" "To some extent, yes. And is it true that Mrs. Holbrook had been a patient of yours before this accident?" Dr. Raymond hesitated. "Yes, she had been seeing me for some back issues. So she already had pre-existing back problems before the accident in question. She had some issues, yes, but this injury is new." Robert let that answer hang in the air for a moment before moving on. "Dr. Raymond, have you reviewed the police report from this accident?" "No." So you do not know what speed Mrs. Holbrook was traveling when the impact occurred? No, I was not there. And you are basing your opinion solely on what Mrs. Holbrook has told you about how the accident happened? Yes, along with my examination of her physical condition. No further questions. Next, Glenn called an expert witness, a forensic accident reconstructionist named Martin Phillips. Mr. Phillips had prepared a detailed report analyzing the accident based on photos and Patricia's description of events. In your expert opinion, what caused this accident? Glenn asked. Based on my analysis, the primary cause was ice on the sidewalk creating hazardous conditions, Phillips replied confidently. The vehicle lost traction on this ice and slid into the fence. If the property owner had salted the sidewalk, this accident would not have occurred. Robert's cross-examination was methodical. Mr. Phillips, you were not at the scene on the morning of the accident, correct? Correct. And you are basing your analysis on photographs taken after the accident and the plaintiff's description of events? Yes, that is standard practice in accident reconstruction. Did you examine the defendant's vehicle? I reviewed photographs of it. Did you test the brakes? No. Did you test the tires to see if they were properly inflated and had adequate tread? No, but did you review Mrs. Holbrook's driving record? That was not part of my analysis. So you did not know that she had 2 speeding tickets and 1 prior accident in the past few years? No. Mr. Phillips, is it possible that the accident was caused by driver error rather than ice on the sidewalk? Phillips shifted uncomfortably. It is possible, but based on the evidence I reviewed, I believe ice was the primary factor. But you did not test the primary assumption that Mrs. Holbrook was driving safely and carefully, did you? I had no reason to doubt her account. No further questions. The first day of trial ended with Patricia's side resting their case. Robert told me he felt good about how things were going, but I was anxious. Patricia had put on a convincing performance, and I worried the judge might buy it. Day 2 began with our defense. Robert called me to the stand first. I was sworn in and took my seat, trying to ignore Patricia glaring at me from the plaintiff's table. Robert walked me through the morning of the accident, my efforts to document everything, and my history of compliance with HOA rules and city codes. He asked me about the previous citations Patricia had filed against me, establishing a pattern of her targeting me for minor or non-existent violations. Mr. Emerson, you typically salt your sidewalk in winter? Robert asked. Sometimes, when I remember to and when conditions seem particularly bad, but I was not aware it was required or expected. And on the morning of January 14th, had you been outside to assess the conditions? No, it was 6:30 in the morning. I had just woken up and was making coffee. So you had no opportunity to salt the sidewalk even if you had wanted to? That is correct. Glenn's cross-examination was aggressive. He tried to paint me as careless and dismissive of safety concerns, as someone who thought rules did not apply to him. He kept bringing up the previous citations, trying to establish that I was a problem homeowner. Mr. Emerson, you have been cited 4 times in 3 years, correct? Glenn asked. Yes, but each of those citations was either erroneous or for an extremely minor issue. But you were cited 4 times. That is more than most of your neighbors, is it not? I do not know how many times most of my neighbors have been cited. Is it fair to say you have an adversarial relationship with my client? I would say your client has been adversarial toward me, yes. Glenn tried to trip me up on details about exactly when I came outside, what I saw, what I said to Patricia, but my story had not changed because it was the truth. I had come outside, found her car in my fence, and been baffled when she tried to blame me. Next, Robert called Officer David Morrison, the the police officer who had responded to the accident. Officer Morrison calmly testified about what he had found at the scene, his investigation, and his conclusions. Officer Morrison, in your professional opinion, was there anything unusual about the ice conditions on the sidewalk adjacent to Mr. Emerson's property? Robert asked. No. Ice was present throughout the neighborhood due to overnight temperatures. The conditions at that location were consistent with conditions I observed elsewhere. Did you observe any signs of negligent property maintenance? No. The property appeared well maintained. Did you cite Mr. Emerson for any violation? No. Did you find any evidence that he had violated any city code or ordinance? No. On cross-examination, Glenn tried to get Officer Morrison to admit there was ice present, as if that fact alone proved negligence. Officer Morrison patiently explained that ice in Colorado in January was inevitable, not evidence of wrongdoing. Robert then called our own expert witness, a traffic safety consultant named Dr. Elizabeth Garcia. Dr. Garcia had reviewed all the same evidence as Patricia's expert, plus additional materials including Patricia's driving record and vehicle maintenance records. Dr. Garcia, what is your opinion about the cause of this accident? Robert asked. In my professional opinion, this accident was caused by excessive speed for the conditions and possible driver inattention, Dr. Garcia replied. The plaintiff claims she was traveling at 12 miles per hour, but the damage to both the fence and her vehicle suggests a higher speed. Additionally, her vehicle maintenance records show she had not had her tires rotated or her brakes serviced in over a year, despite driving over 15,000 miles in that period. So, in your opinion, did the presence of ice on the sidewalk cause this accident? Ice may have been a contributing factor, but it was not the primary cause. If the plaintiff had been driving at an appropriate speed and her vehicle had been properly maintained, she would have been able to stop or slow down before hitting the fence. Glenn's cross-examination focused on the difference between Dr. Garcia's estimated speed and Patricia's claimed speed, but Dr. Garcia held firm, explaining the physics and mathematics behind her analysis. Finally, Robert called several of my neighbors as character witnesses. Monica Chen testified that she had never observed any safety issues with my property, and that the sidewalk conditions that morning were no worse than anywhere else in the neighborhood. Jerry Patterson testified that he had been outside at 6:15 that morning, just 15 minutes before the accident, and had walked past my house without incident. He described the sidewalk as having some ice, but being no more dangerous than any other sidewalk in Boulder in January. When both sides rested, Judge Fernandez asked for closing arguments. Glenn stood and made one last passionate plea about the importance of holding property owners accountable for maintaining safe conditions, about how Patricia had suffered and continued to suffer, and about how the court needed to send a message that negligence would not be tolerated. Robert's closing was straightforward. Your Honor, the plaintiff crashed her own vehicle due to driving too fast for conditions in a poorly maintained car. Rather than accept responsibility, she has chosen to blame the homeowner whose property she damaged. The evidence clearly shows no negligence on the part of the defendant. We ask the court to find in favor of Mr. Emerson and dismiss this case. Judge Fernandez did not need long to deliberate. She asked a few clarifying questions about the city code and HOA guidelines, reviewed her notes, and then rendered her verdict. The court finds in favor of the defendant, Marcus Emerson. The plaintiff has failed to demonstrate that the defendant owed or breached any duty of care. Whether conditions are not the responsibility of individual property owners, except in specific circumstances that do not apply here. Furthermore, The evidence suggests this accident was caused by the plaintiff's driving rather than any condition of the defendant's property. Case dismissed. The court also awards costs to the defendant. I felt a wave of relief so intense I almost laughed. It was over. Patricia had lost. Patricia stood up, her face red with anger. "This is a miscarriage of justice," she announced loudly. "You are protecting a negligent property owner who nearly killed me." Judge Fernandez fixed her with a stern look. "Mrs. Holbrook, you would be wise not to continue that line of commentary in my courtroom. The case is decided. You are free to appeal if you believe there are grounds, but I am confident the appellate court would uphold this decision." We filed out of the courtroom. Patricia and Glenn swept past without making eye contact, though I heard Patricia saying something about corrupt judges and biased system. Robert shook my hand. "Congratulations. I never doubted we would win, but it is always good to make it official." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you go home and try to forget this ever happened." "The court awarded you costs, which means she should pay your legal fees, but do not hold your breath waiting for that check. People who file frivolous lawsuits rarely pay up voluntarily. Your insurance company will pursue it if they want to, but honestly, you should just move on." I thanked Robert and drove home, feeling lighter than I had in months. The lawsuit was over. I had won. Patricia had been proven wrong in court by a judge with everything officially documented. I assumed that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 3 weeks after the trial, I received a notice from the HOA that there would be a special election for the position of president. Sandra Young was not seeking re-election, having decided that dealing with Patricia and her crusades was not worth the volunteer position. Patricia Holbrook was running unopposed. I called Sandra to ask what happened. She sounded exhausted on the phone. "I am done, Marcus," she said. "Patricia has made the past year absolutely miserable. She has filed complaints against me, against my family, against my friends. She showed up at my workplace to confront me about HOA business. My husband told me I needed to choose between my marriage and being HOA president, and that was an easy choice." "So Patricia just gets what she wants?" I asked. "Unless someone else runs against her, yes." I thought about it for exactly 2 seconds before saying, "Then I will run against her." Sandra laughed, but it was a tired laugh. "Marcus, do you understand what you are signing up for? She sued me for crashing into my fence and lost. I am not afraid of her." Being HOA president is not about being afraid. It is about having the time and energy to deal with constant complaints, drama, and petty disputes. Are you ready for that, honestly? No, but I am less ready to live in a neighborhood where Patricia Holbrook has unchecked power. Sandra was quiet for a moment, then said, "Okay. If you are serious, I will help you. We have 2 weeks until the election." Those 2 weeks were a crash course in neighborhood politics. Sandra walked me through everything the president needed to do, from scheduling board meetings to reviewing complaints to managing the HOA budget. She introduced me to the other reasonable homeowners who could form a base of support, people who were as tired of Patricia's antics as I was. Monica Chen became my unofficial campaign manager, going door to door with me to talk to neighbors about what kind of HOA president I would be. My pitch was simple: reasonable enforcement of reasonable rules, focusing on actual issues rather than petty violations, and treating homeowners like adults rather than children who needed constant supervision. Patricia's campaign was the opposite. She positioned herself as the only person willing to stand up for community standards, painting me as a dangerous rebel who had nearly caused her death and gotten away with it because of a corrupt legal system. She printed glossy flyers showing her car crashed into my fence, with text reading, "Is this the leadership we want?" The election was held on a Saturday in early October at the community center. Every homeowner was eligible to vote, and turnout was surprisingly high. Over 200 people showed up out of the 340 households in Meadowbrook Heights. We each gave a short speech before the voting began. Patricia went first, delivering a passionate address about maintaining property values, enforcing standards, and keeping Meadowbrook Heights the prestigious community it deserved to be. She pointedly avoided mentioning the lawsuit she had just lost. My speech was shorter. "I am running for HOA president because I believe we can have standards without being unreasonable, rules without being petty, and community without being overbearing. I promise to focus on things that actually matter, to treat every homeowner with respect, and to remember that an HOA exists to serve its members, not to control them. Thank you." The votes were counted by a neutral third party that Sandra had hired. The whole process took about an hour, during which Patricia held court with her supporters in one corner of the room while I nervously chatted with Monica, Jerry, and several other neighbors. Finally, the counter announced the results. For the position of HOA president, Marcus Emerson received 123 votes. Patricia Holbrook received 79 votes. With 38 abstentions, Marcus Emerson is elected president. I had won, not by a huge margin, but decisively enough that there could be no question. Patricia stood up, her face contorted with rage. "This is a sham," she announced. "The voting was rigged. I demand a recount." The counter calmly explained that observers from both campaigns had been present throughout the counting process, that everything had been done by the book, and that a recount was not warranted. Patricia turned to the crowd. "You have elected a man who was sued for negligence. A man who puts this community at risk. Do not come crying to me when property values plummet and our neighborhood becomes a free-for-all." With that, she stormed out, Glenn following behind her. The rest of the crowd seemed relieved. Several people came up to congratulate me and thank me for running. Monica hugged me and said, "You are going to be great at this." I hoped she was right. I officially took over as HOA president the following week, with Sandra generously staying on to help with the transition. The first board meeting I chaired was cordial and productive, covering routine business without any drama or lengthy complaints. Patricia had resigned from the board entirely after losing the election, which made meetings much smoother. In her place, the board elected Thomas Wainwright, a retired accountant who brought a calm, analytical approach to every issue. Over the next few months, I worked to reshape the HOA culture. We revised the complaint process to require photographic evidence and to filter out obviously petty violations. We increased communication with homeowners through a monthly newsletter. We organized community events like a summer barbecue and a Halloween party to build actual neighborly connections rather than just enforcing rules. The change was noticeable. People seemed happier. There were fewer complaints, not because violations were being ignored, but because people were treating each other reasonably. Patricia, meanwhile, seemed to fade into the background. She still lived in the neighborhood, but she stopped attending meetings and stopped filing complaints. I saw her occasionally, usually driving past or walking into her house, but we did not interact. Then, in March of the following year, I got a call from Officer Morrison. "Marcus, I wanted to give you a heads up about something. We just arrested Patricia Holbrook." My heart sank. "For what?" "Insurance fraud. Turns out she has been filing false insurance claims for years. After your case, her insurance company started investigating her more closely." They found she had filed 4 different claims in the past 3 years for accidents that either did not happen or were not as severe as she claimed. The DA is prosecuting. I did not know what to say. Does this have anything to do with my fence? Tangentially. Your case is what made them look closer. The adjuster who handled your claim thought something seemed off about her whole presentation. How prepared she was with photos and medical records, how quickly she lawyered up, started pulling records and found a pattern. The insurance fraud charges were serious. Patricia had collected over $100,000 in fraudulent claims over 4 years. She had apparently perfected a system of staging minor accidents, exaggerating injuries, and hiring doctors who would support her claims without asking too many questions. The trial was scheduled for September, almost exactly 2 years after my trial had concluded. I followed it in the local news. Patricia maintained her innocence throughout, claiming she was being persecuted for being a strong woman who stood up for herself. The jury did not buy it. They convicted her on 7 counts of insurance fraud after deliberating for less than 4 hours. She was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the insurance companies she had defrauded. Glenn, who had not been charged but whose reputation took a serious hit by association, closed his law practice and moved out of state before Patricia even began serving her sentence. The house they had owned in Meadowbrook Heights went up for sale. A young family with 2 kids bought it in November, and they turned out to be wonderful neighbors. As for me, I served as HOA president for 2 years before deciding I had done my part, and it was time to let someone else take over. Monica Chen ran to replace me, and won easily. The neighborhood continued to thrive under her leadership, with sensible rules, reasonable enforcement, and an actual sense of community rather than constant surveillance and petty grievances. I had my fence repaired permanently with reinforced posts after the insurance settlement finally came through. I installed a doorbell camera, not because I was paranoid, but because after everything that had happened, it seemed like a reasonable precaution. I salted my sidewalk more regularly in winter, not because I was legally required to, but because it was the neighborly thing to do. Sometimes when I pulled into my driveway and looked at that fence, I thought about that cold January morning when Patricia crashed into it and tried to blame me for her own mistakes. I thought about how one person's inability to accept responsibility had spiraled into lawsuits, elections, and ultimately criminal charges. But mostly, I just thought about how glad I was to live in a neighborhood where people treated each other with respect, where rules existed to help rather than to control, and where common sense had finally prevailed over petty tyranny. The fence stood solid and strong, a reminder that sometimes when someone crashes into your life trying to cause damage, the best response is to stand firm, tell the truth, and trust that eventually justice will prevail. It had taken 2 years, a lawsuit, an election, and a criminal investigation, but in the end, the woman who crashed into my fence and sued me for not warning about black ice had faced consequences for her pattern of fraud and manipulation. Meadowbrook Heights was peaceful now, the kind of neighborhood it was always meant to be. And every time I saw that fence, I smiled, knowing that I had played a small part in making that peace possible.